Hello, everyone, and good evening. We are back with the latest, is the third in the series, Best Practices for Securing E-commerce. And I appreciate everybody who signed up, and so many people have actually shown up. I'm glad for the exposure that this webinar series is getting on that. Okay, I guess we are slightly delayed, so I'll jump into the subject directly. Now, we are starting off with best practices for securing e-commerce. E-commerce, as you know, nowadays is extremely important. Everybody buys everything through online. Now, this is me just to for you to enable you to put a name on the face. I have this company, Vista Infosec. We are a QSA ourselves. I am a QSA, CISOs, serious and stuff. Okay, getting to the definitions. E-commerce is simply a card not present payment channel where you don't really need to swipe your card. Now, this can include everything, that is your e-commerce website accessible from your web browser, even the web browsers, even those e-commerce sites that you access using your tabs or your mobile phones, that comes under it. Even an app version. So many like Amazon, eBay, and stuff, they have their own apps. Even that comes as a part of e-commerce. And just to get the definitions in place, there is payment service providers. I put PSP, but we have also seen earlier there is something called as a TPSP, that is third-party service providers. They are basically facilitating your e-commerce transactions. Now, so what is the scope? Now over here, this becomes extremely tricky as to identifying what is the scope for this particular e-commerce under PCI DSS. What comes, what doesn't come, and we frequently hear stuff like, "Oh, we have outsourced everything. This doesn't apply to us." So that's where it becomes very interesting. And what we've done is we just put down a few points. So software development done on behalf of the merchant, which could be your e-commerce website. You have a hosted website, either fully or partially managed by the solution provider, and even the data center which provides support for the website comes in the scope. Shopping cart, online order management softwares. The last part is almost always is what you've seen is ignored and gets used by hackers and disgruntled employees. So if a company says that, okay, my servers are hosted at XYZ data center and the data center is PCI DSS certified, it doesn't make you PCI DSS certified, because it depends on the scope of the PCI certification. For the ITC, it could be that they have only included environmental and physical security requirements of PCI DSS in scope. So even if not, it doesn't make you out of the scope. There are other hosting options. It could be offline data storage, backups comes under it. Merchant plugins. It could be that the website is yours, but the rest all is provided by the provider. Managed services. It could be WAPs. Everything WAPs that you are using, SIM that you're using, all come directly as a part of the scope for PCI DSS. Now, some key factors. Now, why are e-commerce sites so successful? And that's why almost every company that I know is jumping into it, and even rather. Brick and mortar are shifting slowly but surely to e-commerce, that is providing some sort of services or sales using their e-commerce website. There are some people who say that e-commerce simply means commerce using the internet, but as far as PCI DSS is concerned, the definition is doing any sort of card transactions or commerce, that is exchange of money using the internet. So obviously it is you're using your card for making those details, unless you're using net banking, which doesn't come under it. So okay, there are different ways in which that happens. The dimensions of e-commerce security, where all you need to keep in mind: one is integrity, that is nobody should be able to intercept and or modify any sort of data. It could be that you have placed an order and somebody changed the order value, or somebody changed the address of delivery, or somebody intercepted and changed the card details or copied the card details. And the second is non-repudiation. Simply means that either the buyer or the seller, all the participants, nobody should be in a position to say, "Oh, I can do this." It could be that they have done it. It could be that they haven't done it. So in that case, there should be some sort of checks and balances in place to ensure that uh, the participants in the e-commerce transactions do not get into a position of saying, oh, I didn't do this, when they had actually done it. Authenticity is, now you may go to XYZ website on the internet. So how does the recipient or the transmitter know who they are interacting with? That's where the authenticity of the transactions also becomes of prime importance. This explains itself. There is the confidentiality, privacy with regards to the customer details in itself, and the availability to ensure that the e-commerce site continues to work and provide services as and how it is required. So it is not just confidentiality, there is CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now there are different ways in which it can be done, and this is a summary. As you can see, there is somebody over here who is sending some information like a smoke signal. You can see there's two red Indians, 1 and 2 over here on the left hand side. One is sending some packets up like a smoke signal. Somebody sitting in between has added to it. Or non-repudiation in the sense where one person on the left is actually sending out the data, but he's saying that no, I have not done it. And confidentiality would actually be when somebody is sending data, but somebody in between is not able to see what is actually being sent. So these are the dimensions of e-commerce security. A few key threats, I'm sure that most of you would be aware. There are 3 key points of vulnerability within an e-commerce site. The client, obviously, the server, and also the communication channel. And the most common threats, of course, are the malicious codes, hacking, cyber fraud. It is somebody else using somebody else's card. Spoofing is a denial of service, sniffing, and last but not the least is the insider job. That is somebody in your team misusing access to the systems to to do something unauthorized. The denial of service, again, for online companies becomes extremely important. The reason being, in case your e-commerce site goes down, you lose business, you lose reputation. And if this happens again and again, you might as well shut down. Now, in a denial of service, there is not just one hacker. He has these millions of zombies spread across the world, and they flood the network computers, the victim servers, with data, which leads to the network pipe being used up, or the server resources being used up, or the firewall resources being used up, leading to genuine people not being able to access the service. That's a denial of service. There are various implementation types with regards to how e-commerce works and what are the overlaps between a merchant, which is actually providing the service, and the service provider in the backend. Now, this is where the basic interplay happens, where everybody tries to pass the responsibility that no, it is not my job. X person is doing it and Y person is doing it. And so that is there. Okay, one thing I would like to say over here, in case you have any queries, please punch it, and I'll go through it as I go through or towards the end. I will add it up and answer you. So please punch in your queries in case you do have any at any point of time. So the first implementation type, we are looking at an iframe. It is there, and I'm sure that many of you may have heard of it or seen it. Now, an iframe is basically a way of working in which the merchant, the service provider provides you the frame in which the service provider's page is embedded in the merchant's web page. So as far as the client is concerned, he sees one web page, but a part of that web page is actually provided by the service provider. That's an iframe. Now the iframe is unique because it provides something called a sandboxing. So allows so it isolates the content or the embedded frame from the parent page. Now this ensures that information is not accessible even if the merchant's website is hacked. So if the merchant's website is hacked and the server has been compromised, still the hacker sitting on the server cannot see the data which is flowing on the iframe. This is a secure way of working because the payment service provider's iframe receives all the cardholder data that is provided by the client, the customer. So how it actually works, the merchant creates an iframe which is the current web page of the merchant, the service provider creates, the clients put in all the data, sends it, the PSP creates a payment form, sends to the customer browser within the iframe. and the client checks out, the client puts in all the payment details, redirects to a hosted payment page. It goes in the backend to the payment solution provider, gets authorized, and the transaction result then finally goes back to the merchant, and he says order is processed. So it is all seamless, it is all secure, but there are still a few areas that you need to look at. Now over here, the service provider, whomsoever is who's providing the iframe to the merchant cannot say that I don't come under anything. Still, he is needed to provide SAQ-A. You may have heard of SAQ, self-assessment questionnaires from PCI DSS. This is primarily the smallest subset of PCI DSS, and it is something that needs to be done. Because iframe provides a huge amount of security, because it relies on something called as a same origin policy, which is enforced by all modern web browsers. So even if attacker compromises the merchant's websites, he cannot see the content. But what can happen over here is that the hacker can hack into the website and change the page and modify the iframe content, or create alternative content within the iframe, within the frame, which then allows for the payment processes to be complete, as well as creates a copy of the cardholder data. So if that happens, then the iframe is actually useless. Now, without monitoring and editing controls on the merchant's infrastructure, such an attack would be impossible to detect, and it cannot be the service provider's fault. It is the onus of that falls on the merchant itself. Now, with regards to SAQ-A, I would really suggest the merchant it is recommended rather to use PCI SAQ-A for PCI DSS 3.2. It has as low as 22 controls, so 22 requirements only. And so it is very easy to fill, and it should be done. And I also strongly suggest for the merchants to consult with their acquirer or the payment branch to determine whether they actually need to get certified on the entire PCI DSS, or just an SAQ-A is fine, good enough. Coming to the next one, the URL redirect. This is very straightforward. Over here, simply speaking, as you can see in the flow, the client takes the data and just passes it back directly to the payment processor in the backend. That's a URL redirect. That is, you go to the client, you go to the merchant's website as a customer, fill up what you want to buy, and the merchant simply redirects the page via proper URL redirect. For those of you who are aware of how HTML works, by URL redirect to the payment processing website and gets the processing done. So there is no iframe. You select the order, it goes to the payment service provider for processing. So this is again straightforward. The PSP, the merchant website, sends a redirect command to the customer's browser. Customer browser then requests a payment from payment form from the PSP. Then the PSP creates a payment form and sends to the customer's browser. The customer's browser displays the PSP payment form, enters the account data, and finally sends it for authorization. So over here too, there are some problems that can happen, and what is recommended is for you to do PCI SAQ-A. But over here again, if the website is hacked, it is very well possible that the website doesn't get compromised, because that is the merchant's responsibility, because somebody hacks into the website and just changes the URL redirect to somebody else, to like a man-in-the-middle attack. So this becomes a very critical issue for a URL redirect. The next I can say is a DPM, as it is called, direct post method. In a direct post method, simply speaking, in the earlier two, as you had seen, the payment page is provided by the payment service provider. But in this case, the entire page, look and feel, and everything are provided by the merchant in itself. The merchant's website creates a payment page. Remember that, unlike iframe and URL redirect, here the merchant's website creates a merchant page. The customer's browser displays the payment page and sends the cardholder data sends the cardholder data directly to the payment service provider. The payment service provider then receives the cardholder data and sends it for authorization. So in the DPM, again, as you can see, there could be vulnerabilities wherein since the cardholder data is being accepted by the page, the list of vulnerabilities are also higher and the accountability of the merchant is also higher. But over here, they get higher control over the page, over what is to be done, what is not to be done. For example, calculation of discounts, calculation of bulk orders, all those things happen. So there are companies who use a direct post method also, but over here, remember that in DPM, direct post method, SAQA is not enough. You may need to go ahead with SAQA-EP. Okay, SAQA-EP. Now in this, there are 191 requirements. So SAQA, 22 requirements, SAQA-EP, 191 requirements. But even in this becomes slightly touchy because there could be some changes in the way that the delivery is being maintained. So it is advisable that such merchants consult with their acquirers and the payment brands to check whether AAP is enough or do they need a full-fledged PCI certification. The next again is a JavaScript form. It is again not that difficult to understand because similarly in this thing, what happens is a JavaScript payment page originates from the merchant's website only. So JavaScript generates the page. The JavaScript is put by the merchant in itself, and the JavaScript then takes the data, sends it to the PSP for processing. It is almost similar to the DPM method that we saw earlier, that is a direct post method. Now, in this again, you can see there is JavaScript errors could possibly be compromised by determined hacker, but that is how some companies work. Now, again, in this case, merchants using JavaScript e-commerce may be eligible for PCI SAQA-EP. Again, it has 191 controls, huge thing to be taken care of. But understand over here, momentarily, while the JavaScript is being executed, there is a lot of control that the merchant can execute over the session. So that is why many companies prefer a JavaScript method over a DPM, that is a direct post method. Okay, the last in this thing, the different methodologies for e-commerce is the API model. In this, the API model is the greatest, requires the maximum amount of controls and also the most vulnerable. But still, companies use it for various business purposes, similar to what we have seen earlier. In the API website, the only difference is that unlike the DPM or the JavaScript, where the card data is sent directly to the to the payment service provider, in the API method, the card data is sent back to the merchant site in different formats. It could be XML, JSON, or name value pairs, so many things before, and then the merchant then sends it to the payment service provider for authorization. So again, as the client, as the merchant is receiving and processing card data, the requirement for PCI goes high. So they, instead of A or AEP as we saw earlier, in the API model, you have to go in for SAQD, which requires like 250 questions to be answered. It's a high risk area. Now, hackers typically will always be looking whether you are an API model interface. So they'll be waiting for you. So you set yourself up as a good target in case you're using the AEP, in case you're using the API model. So take care. Unless you're really wanting to have a huge amount of control, do not go in for the API model. It is generally used by large organizations with very specific processing needs. So unless you have the force be with you sort of thing, a lot of money and a lot of power, do not go in for this. Not good for a small merchant. And you can definitely have a wholly outsourced e-commerce solution. Now, you may say, in the earlier models too, we had outsourced a few things. So what is the difference? But understand, in the wholly outsourced model, in the earlier things as you saw, the service provider was just doing transaction processing for you, nothing else. But in a wholly outsourced e-commerce model, it provides a lot of add-ons, such as product search, giving you a shopping cart, helping you during checkout, it does the checkout, does the account management, even back office features such as product management, CRM, order management, even customizing of the appearance. So in this case, you outsource the whole thing. You did not be able to manage anything. You did not have to do anything. They take care of the entire shopping experience, not just the payments. So again, you need to be very sure that whomsoever you're outsourcing to is PCI DSS compliant, because finally um, it is your responsibility. In case they are not, then you need to ensure or check that is all the requirements of PCI DSS are alleviated or taken care of. Um, Finally, remember, even if you're using a fully outsourced PC merchant model, e-commerce model, still the responsibilities of PCI DSS lies on you, and you have to. That's why we say go in for service provider who's got the entire PCI DSS model in place. To summarize, as you can see, what we had seen earlier, the wholly outsourced redirect and iframe come under SEQ-A. 22 questions. Direct post has 191 questions. JavaScript again SEQ-A EP 191, API and others SEQ-D with 250 odd questions. The problem also comes up with regards to how are we going to scope out our the e-commerce model that you have in place. So what comes under, what doesn't come under. So here is a quick representation of how to scope out your e-commerce transactions. So as you can see over here in the screen, that is, I'm sure you can see it, all your customers, your online, offline, it could be if you're having like a totally online experience, or it could be like a Moto, that is mail order, telephone order portal. Even in that case, so the storefront or the Moto portal comes under the scope. If you're looking at the telephone order, then you're looking at call center staff, customer service staff, finance staff, because the chargeback later comes to the finance staff and they have to retain the PAN. The retained PAN, so even the PET, that is the pin entry devices, the virtual terminals that you have in place, everything, the hosting providers all come as a part of scope for your e-commerce. So again, look at the entire origination till elimination or the completion of transaction from PCI DSS perspective, and that becomes your scope. Incidental activities, I just made a note of these things. That is, many companies that we have seen, merchants and all that you work with, they would be having good infrastructure for PCI DSS, everything is in place, but where they really falter is with regards to telephone orders that is taken. So somebody is sitting, taking telephone orders, writing or punching in the requirements in a computer screen, and they fail to include that. What about refund request? Because all these refund request chargebacks doesn't have an application. The card data is sent by email, it is stored on some system. So how is that taken care of? Especially in refund, retrieval and retrieval request, chargeback request, dispute issues that is pointed out where the person says I've not purchased, stuff like that. These forms the gray areas where vulnerabilities are there in process and can and will be misused. So keep that in mind. Best practices with regards to PCI DSS. Where is it? So where is the card holder data when you are scoping it out? When you are scoping out your card environment, where is the card holder data going to be? As for PCI DSS 1.1.3, a well-designed data flow diagram is a top priority. Now, I've put down a few pointers over here. I'm not going to read it to you. You can pause the video and go through it. You can see that even within the cardholder data environment, how are the web applications functionality and how does the flow happens within the web page, within the web application is of prime importance. So you can identify where it is. Many a time I've seen data flow diagram just having, there's a web server, there's a data server, they show red lines in between the cardholder data is flowing. But what does this web server mean? How many web servers? Where are they placed? What is their IP address? How's the interconnectivity being maintained? All those things becomes a borderline issue, which is very which is not very often that I get to see in a data flow diagram. So this data flow diagram should be illustrating where the security controls are implemented, what payments are the merchant's responsibility, and what is a third-party environment, what is the merchant's environment. All those things have to be included in the data flow diagram itself. Secondly, as we always say to our clients, get rid of the data if you don't need. Eliminate it. You eliminate it, you decrease your risk, you decrease your scope, you save time, you save money in certification, money in actually managing that that card information. So again, you need to have a very strong process for what is required to be done with regards to cardholder data discovery. So card data discovery is something that you really need to look at, and wherever it is found and it is not required, check if it is not required first, and then just simply erase it from the systems, so that it's one less pain for you to keep track of. Next thing, evaluate the risk. Evaluate the risk with your service provider. What is the business model? You saw all the business models that we saw earlier. You've seen how it can be used. There is iframe, URL redirect, fully hosted, managed, in-source, outsource. There are so many different ways of working. You can even have just one part of it outsourced to somebody else. So all those things, evaluate who is your service provider and have they been evaluated for the relevant SEQs under PCI DSS. And all those service providers that you have, include them under the RA as per risk assessment as per PCI DSS requirement number 12.2. PSP, remote access to the cardholder environment. PSP is a payment service provider. They would be needing, for various reasons, they may need to access your cardholder environment. So as per 8.1.5, you need to have service provider IDs segregated, and not just one ID for the entire service provider organization. And you are then setting yourself up for a major non-conformity during the audit, and also for issues later on in case that common password is shared by the service provider. So next thing that we always suggest is, it may be a bit painful, but understand how and when a service provider. So it is like once a week, once a month, you need to check. So ensure that first of all, 8.3 says that you need to have a multi-factor authentication for remote access. And last we say is that this is our recommendation. We don't say that it's a PCI recommendation. That is, let the service provider contact you that you need to enter your environment. At that time, enable those IDs. And as soon as it is over, check and turn it off. So that in case when the password is compromised, you are limiting exposure to those times when the service provider has actually requested that please give us access to your environment. ASP scanning, again, for it is required as per 11.2 for external and internal vulnerability scanning. The hosting provider, whoever is your service provider, can undergo ASP scans on its own, or you can get it done as a part of your own initiative. But who's going to do it? Establish that earlier on when you are signing up. And also, we've seen this happen sometimes, that is, the service provider is not very clear as to what services are in scope, what systems are in scope, and what all systems needs to get assessed as a part of ASP scanning. Ensure that that is identified and it has been appropriately scoped, because remember, you cannot simply say that he said it is ASP scan. It is, the responsibility still lies on you. It is up to you, because you decided to outsource your card environment. And the client, as far as the client or the customer is concerned, the customer knows you, not your service provider, and your business compulsions for outsourcing. The penetration testing, again, because you have outsourced, it doesn't mean that this annual penetration testing, which is required as per 11.3, is done. You can just sign an SLA and get it over with. The SLA is not the answer. You need to understand and ask them to show the reports. That is, when the check was done, have they closed it, and whether, and get the clean reports after that, to ensure that they have actually closed it and your services which is being processed by somebody else is actually safe. Best practices, quickly we'll breeze through this and we'll close out. We are reaching the end of our time. We actually reached it. Okay, a few minutes more. Under PCI DSS 4.1, when you're interacting, when you're securing your e-commerce, ensure you're using TLS 1.1 or higher, that is TLS 1.1 or 1.2. Again, under 6.6, you need to consider having a WAF in place, web application firewall or IDS as per requirement level 4. Filter, that is, since you are interacting with a service provider, ensure that you are not opening up your network to the entire world, and ensure that even when he is providing you access into his environment, he is only on a case-to-case and as a fixed IP address and port, because finally he is managing your data. The PCI DSS requirement 6.3 and 5 pushes you for secure coding practices, and we strongly, you may say you're not coming under PCI DSS because that's your own internal environment, but we always strongly say to all our clients that is, use it. It's a good standard. PCI DSS, PCI DSS for application development is a very good standard. Use it, even though you're not getting certified on it. Your applications are safe. And if you're using a commercial off-the-shelf product which is not being customized in any manner for you, ensure that you're using a PCI DSS validated app. Last, I wouldn't say last, what we can see next is regularly review any links from the merchant's website to the payment gateway. That is, ensure that nobody has hacked or made any changes, or that there are no multiple links which got bypassed and stuff. So ensure that penetration testing happens appropriately, code gets reviewed, and the entire functionality gets tested end to end. Sorry. A few more for your pleasure. There is anti-malware, antivirus on all your systems. Ask for change detection. Requirement number 10 speaks about log management. So ensure that you ask your service provider for a change detection system in place. That is, whenever any changes are made to the system, what process they have in place to ensure that those changes are detected adequately in advance with all the requirements of PCI DSS met. Sorry, running a cough. Okay, as per 11.4 and 5, they need to have an IDS and FIM solution. Ensure that adequate training is provided to the people in place. Incident management is done. Limit the display of the firewall of the PAN. You may want to consider as a requirement, as per requirement 1.3, additional firewall between app and DB servers. And even though it is not a network segmentation, is not a PCI DSS requirement, we still suggest it to be done so that your, the world doesn't become the scope for you. Everything gets segregated, your exposure is limited. The training, again, we have put the requirements, awareness of potential threats for all your people, incident management, who will be done, train your technical staff for security infrastructure. Now, you may have the best firewalls, APT solutions, SIEM in place, but so many times we see that the administrator is not even in a position to identify what screen is in front of him. They have just had it in place. There is the due diligence is not maintained by many companies. They simply say, oh, we are a service provider. If there is something, we tell him and he does it, logs on remotely and does it. That's not the solution. You need to have some sort of an internal capability also, in case your service provider is not able to manage your critical infrastructure appropriately. Some additional thoughts, again, stay on top of the latest alerts from PCI DSS, SANS, NIST, CIS. You may want to consider an additional firewall between app and DB servers, because one of the requirements of PCI DSS is that from the internet, direct connectivity to the app server should not be allowed. It should always go via the app server. Sorry, direct connection to the database server is not allowed. It should always go to via the app server. Okay, a few questions that you can ask your PSP. Does the solution ever receive CHD, that is cardholder data, or what type of technology is in place, whether it's iframe, whether the cardholder data is ever stored in memory on transmitted? What about the sensitive authentication data, SAD, which involves your CVV and expiry details and stuff? Is it collected for authorization? If yes, then how long is it retained? It could be a few seconds, it could be a few minutes. Identify where it is. And if they have to store cardholder data, then what is the retention requirements? and what is the process in place for secure deletion. And last but not the least is the cryptographic architecture used to store. So the key management cryptography in use becomes extremely important, especially when you are outsourcing to a payment service provider. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the presentation. Took a bit more time than usual. My next webinar is coming up on the 27th of May at 4:30, and I'm flying off to Thailand next month. I've been called in as a speaker by the PCI community for their meeting in Thailand next month, and I'll be speaking on PCI DSS in the cloud. And as gesture to you who are there and look at our webinars, I'll be doing the same presentation for you also, so you get to hear what I presented at the PCI DSS conference in Thailand next month. So if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take it. And if you do not have any, no product base, so you cannot ask me which service provider is better. Yes, so any questions that I can take? Okay, I see one, two. Okay, I'll just take one question. We are running solid on late on time, and then I'll reply to the others. So the question over here is there some online listing of service providers to come to know which are the genuine ones? Okay, now there is no such thing. And they need to have PCI DSS in place, or they may need to have some SEQs done, depends on the acquiring and the payment brands. It is up to you to do due diligence, ask them, check the validity of the ROC, AOC, and most important, okay, that's a very good question. So let me add one more dimension. We have had clients who are outsourcing to a service provider, and we ask for the AOC, that is the attestation of compliance. And in the AOC, it is listed out what all services have been certified as a part of PCI DSS. And we have seen in a few instances that the client, the service provider offers say 20 services, but the AOC shows that only 5 or 7 of them are covered under PCI DSS. So you need to check whether whatever you are signing up with has got all the relevant services covered under the AOC. Okay, so that's about it. One slide on ours, who we are. You can look it up on our website or pause the video later on. And I thank you, everybody, for turning up, so many of you, and gracing our webinar over here. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.